Session to order. I didn't worry too much about a slightly longer break because I think we're not going to need to talk a whole lot more about the budget. But our major topic for the work session today is Glenn is going to introduce us to some discussions about the school enrollment plan. Just to set a little bit of the stage for the conversation, it is not a surprise to any of us at the board that, whether it's in transfer appeal hearings or we're talking about student assignment, there are multifaceted things that all come into play in student assignment. And sometimes as a board, we are addressing the issues as they come up and not as effectively in a comprehensive way. About a month, 2-3 weeks ago, a month ago, Glenn and I sat down and talked about some of the bigger issues. And that's the context of, now announced to the public, but you all know we're going to plan to have a work day on student assignment on the 1st of June. The purpose of today's discussion is for Glenn to tell us about the multi-tiered systems of assignment, shall we say? But to lay out some of the issues and challenges that we have before us, Glenn's going to ask a bunch of questions. The purpose of today is not to give answers to those questions. The purpose of today is to get us thinking about those questions so that when we come together on the 1st of June, we will have more efficient discussion. In between now and then, we may have additional questions that we want to say, hey, we need to add these to this comprehensive discussion. So the purpose for the next hour's discussion is really for Glenn to sort of give us some of this bigger overview, put some of the questions on the table, help us think and process, but this really is to lay the groundwork for the work that we're going to do on June 1. So, Glenn?
All right, so, like Dr. Martin said, no decisions need to be made today. I think a lot of the discussion today is just going to be around just letting you know what's on the table, what we would like to hear from you with regards to feedback moving forward. So when we look at the agenda for today, the first 3 bullets are going to be centered around the initial enrollment plan. This is traditionally what we do. We roll out the enrollment plan. We kind of start the discussion by having a presentation like this. The last 4 bullets up there are centered around the topics that we probably want to have more healthy discussion with regards to the board retreat. And so we'll get into those. So we have one new school opening in 2021, South Lakes Elementary, and I have a map to show you where it is exactly. All right, South Lakes Elementary School. We have not settled on a calendar for the school yet. It could either be traditional or multi-track year-round. The capacity, if it's traditional, would be 716. The capacity as a multi-track year-round would be 914. It'll service grades K through 5. And potentially the impacted schools we're looking at is Banks Road Elementary, Fuquay-Varina Elementary, Vance Elementary, and Willow Springs Elementary. And I just want to note that 3 of those schools, Fuquay, Vance, and Willow Springs, all have enrollment caps currently. So we are putting a school in an area where we do have overcrowded schools.
So I'm sorry, the 3, Fuquay, Willow Spring, and Vance all have caps?
Yes.
And Banks and Willow Spring are multi-track?
Yes,
and Vance is track 4.
Yeah.
Track 4.
Hey,
That's a great transition into this next slide. So we are reviewing projections for the area to determine whether we're going to make a recommendation if the school needs to be traditional or multi-track year-round. No matter how you look at it, of those impacted schools, you will have potentially some students who are on traditional calendar or year-round calendar having to change calendars based on the new school assignment. Last year, when we had our assignment plan, we tried to limit that as much as possible. We will again try to do the same, where we limit that impact of families trying to change calendars. And again, we'll have to have continued discussions and review of the projections before we can make a recommendation. Okay? So this is where the school's located. You see the square right in the middle in that peach color. That's Willow Springs. That's the base attendance area for Willow Springs. South Lakes Elementary, the site is located within the Willow Springs Elementary base attendance area. Fuquay Elementary, which is traditional, borders to the west. That's that purplish area to the west there. And then Banks Road to the north and Vance to the east. So feeder pattern alignment. So when we did the enrollment plan for 1920, we looked at that western wedge where we're opening 3 new schools, and we looked at providing feeder pattern alignment for calendars. Now we have all the year-round schools in that area. In elementary feed to a year-round middle school, and all the traditional elementaries feed to a traditional middle. A couple years ago when we opened Buckhorn Creek, we had tossed this idea around about looking at the southern part of Wake to determine, do we need to do this same process? And it didn't go through at that time because it was late in the game, but we were able to implement that for last year's assignment plan. So staff is going to ask, do you want us to look at the southern area to provide some calendar alignment?
I think we can look at, my initial reaction is I'd like to look at portions of it, but I think the opening of Herbert Akins Road Middle School would help us
Planning ahead,
with parts of that. So either we can plan ahead with feeder patterns, but I think having that feeder pattern is important, especially as we saw for those families that go from traditional to year-round for middle school.
Well, and that gets to what we've often said. Anytime there's a calendar change, the longer runway we can give, the better buy-in we're going to get. Yeah. If we make a calendar change a year out, that's really hard to plan.
And as we've done in the last several assignment plans, we have tried to look ahead at the schools that are coming online down the road within the next 7 years to determine, what moves could we possibly make now to try to transition those families into that ultimate move where we're going to get.
So we learned a lot, that we haven't done in the past that we can utilize things that we've learned, like, hey, let's look at what schools, what daycares, because of course, as you all know, for me, I'm going to ride this train all the way through this conversation around my part of the Southern District that is not traditionally used to going to year-round multi-track calendars. And so just the supports that we started to build in this year in new schools, I think are good things that will be beneficial to my part of the Southern County that might have a lot of concerns because this isn't something they're used to.
All right, and just a reminder, I'm sorry, did anybody else have any other comments?
Nope.
Just as a reminder, the more schools that we bring into this conversation with alignment just increases the number of students and schools impacted.
Exactly.
So again, in the last several assignment plans, we've looked at cap schools with enrollment caps, and trying to provide relief. Again, looking at the 7-year plan, we obviously won't address all of these schools in next year's assignment plan, but we will look for opportunities to try to provide relief to some of these overcrowded schools. These are the elementary schools for 1920 with an enrollment cap, and then these are the middle and high school. And just a reminder, a lot of the elementaries have increased with an enrollment cap due to the K-3 class size legislation. But we have made some headway with getting our high schools and middle schools reviewed. So now we get to the board feedback part. These are the 4 items that I've heard from board members that I'd like to discuss today. One being policy 4150 and the 4 pillars of student assignment. The health of the multi-track year-round schools. That's been a discussion that we've had on several occasions. I'd like to continue that discussion. Transportation incentives, that's been tossed around in some of our meetings, and then also discussions about academic programming. So policy 4150 and the 4 pillars, which are student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency. Staff would like to pose the question, when developing an enrollment plan, what should be the main focus? Basically, how do we measure our success? When we roll out an assignment plan, we are finished with the final draft, and parents give feedback, whether they like it or not. How can we stand behind that enrollment plan and say, we were successful because we did X, Y, and Z? And how do we measure that? So that is going to be a question that we would like the board to answer so that staff can have that direction in establishing draft 1.
Jack, do you want the board to answer that question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, and I'll just add, from a policy perspective, I think two questions we have that need to be asked sequentially is, do we agree with the 4 pillars? And if so, do we agree with the language of them? Because I think a lot of our conversations have revolved around that. I think these 4 pillars were written with a global system perspective, not an individual student family perspective. And so if we look at student achievement, we're looking at a school's student achievement rather than you, the individual student. So I think we need to, are these the right pillars? Are these the right principles? Yes or no? Do we need to add something, change something? If they are, is this the appropriate language? Are they described in the right context? So as we think about policy, I think, or this is a language issue that we need to be addressing. Is that a question, Mr. Sutton? Your facial, Mr. Fletcher, your hand's up?
Yeah, I would suggest we need to add another bullet to this page, and that is the health of the magnet schools. We had talked about getting an audit of the magnet schools, not dissimilar from our look at the multi-track schools, in terms of, are we attracting the priority 1 students? Are we filling the priority 1 seats? Do we have magnet schools that are underutilized? And that, I think that is a component that needs to be here and factored into our discussion. We're going to have more reliance upon existing capacity as we move forward, and a higher expectation that we are more effective in using capacity that today doesn't have a student in it. And I think it would be much healthier for us to have a look at all 186 schools, not just the ones that are within 5 miles of new construction. There are needs that those schools have. There are enrollment challenges that they have. There may be academic challenges that they have or facility challenges that they have that are all part of our effort to improve access and support for kids, and at the same time shore up our attractiveness to our clientele. So that, I think that would be an important data set to help us understand about we have 40 magnet schools and 36 multi-track schools. So it's half of our school number, close to it. And I think there's an opportunity for us to look at how we're supporting the magnet strategies in schools, as well as how do we make sure that, in my opinion, the multi-track program is properly supported as well. So,
Mr. Sutton, did you have a comment or question? It may not be formulated.
And I was going to try to wait to get through the presentation before I read.
I don't want
Okay.
to.
We'll have to do a combination.
But if you're going back to the previous,
What's wrong with me?
that. So I would add one that I would say race, poverty, student achievement. Because we continue to witness a resegregation of our district, and we just sort of watch it happen.
You're absolutely right.
We need to know.
So at some point, this board has to say, stop. We're not going to
We have to decide. Right.
go any further until we kind of put a stake in the ground and do something about that. And so I think in terms of the 4 pillars, they are the right pillars. I don't know how you change or add or reword or relanguage those. I mean, I think those are responsive to what we've heard from our families over the years. That they care about proximity, they care about stability and those sort of things. But what we've lost over the years is our focus as a board and as a system and as a district on the race and poverty piece. And we also continue to see a number of schools that kind of spiral downward around the student achievement piece, and we just kind of watch. It feels like sometimes we just kind of watch those schools languish as well, knowing that and how we use student assignment as one tool and a number of tools to kind of help address those things. I think it's become harder and harder to address that through student assignment, but then I think that intentionality becomes that much more incumbent upon us as a board and leadership to give staff direction to figure out then how to do that. Because each time that we know that lever is pulled in one way or another, it affects something else. So then I think staff struggles with trying to figure out where our value is, and we have in our belief statements what we believe and say about what we think about equity and diversity and inclusion and making sure that our schools are healthy and balanced and everything else. But how we operationalize that has remained elusive at best. So I'll stop there because I can probably
you're absolutely right. I mean, there's an intentionality, and that has to be worked into policy.
And we can't sort of skirt around it. We can't kind of talk about equity in transportation, equity in our year-rounds, equity in traditional. I mean, it's got to be a deliberate conversation about that and what we want to see done around that.
Well, an assignment won't be the only tool, but it is a tool. And it's got to be part of that total conversation. So you're absolutely right.
That's why I think we should say health of all schools, because it's health of multi-track, health of magnet, but we're really trying to decide the health of all schools.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that might be many things you can do. We certainly want to be as diverse as possible, but we also want to make sure if we can't, we need to do something else. And in this, what I'm wondering in this, piggybacking on what you two have said, is I also want to know how we are going to deal with vacant seats rather than building new schools. So I guess I don't know whether that's going to fall under the health of multi-track year-round, or that means it falls under multi-track and magnet health. So I want to be sure that's included in that conversation. We don't want vacant seats anywhere.
That's what happened.
Well,
Sometimes we don't pay attention.
I think another piece of this is how we communicate the plan. I think when the plan comes out, I think it was, we've been trying to be agile and responsive, and last year we had an email go out to all families saying, hey, this plan is coming. And I think that although the families that were impacted were not pleased, I think the reaction from families who had gone through this, where they heard about it after the enrollment plan came out, was, gosh, it would have been really nice to have that heads up. I'm so glad you changed that. And I think, we have to communicate with staff what priorities we want to communicate to people. I mean, we can say 4 pillars, but there are times where we have to look at one and then we get smacked with the other 3. And I think that's just how it's set up. And it's not, when you say pillar, it's a structure. It's holding something up. And so when one becomes prioritized over the other 3, there's a perception that table or roof or whatever you're holding is not solid and it's not stable. So
this is the work we need to do around
Right.
Policy 4150, right? I think, as we've all said, a lot of the ideas are sound. Do they communicate well?
No.
And have they left some things out? So that's the work we need to do. We're not going to solve that today. It's the work we need to do. So we're going to move on, but go ahead.
I just want to be sure that when we're having student assignment hearings, that it's not just student assignment people there. It should be magnet, year-round program people, transportation, because all the things that you hear, you can't solve all those.
Right.
So I want to be sure in our future hearings that all the people that are part of the fixing.
So I would say, though, that those people have already been consulted prior to a decision coming to the board.
Yeah, but they're not hearing the input. I agree. I understand what you're saying, but I'd like to hear the dialogue that.
Sort of taking Roxy's concern with your point, your org chart does have a position that will be created
Yeah, but
that has a lot of those.
I was posting last Thursday,
but it's coming.
It's ready.
Okay. And is that something that person might be able to attend?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
that would be it. I wasn't sure that was going to happen before the next
So
one.
let me add on to that. I've circulated to Glenn and the rest of you a form that I call the purpose form relative to, on one sheet of paper, what are the needs of this school, what are the trends in this school, what needs to happen academically, student enrollment, facility, near-term, long-term, as an opportunity to gather that input into one place. Now, the question is whether that's simply an administrative tool or whether there's an opportunity for board members to contribute to that conversation at some point in the process.
Good.
And I think there are several of us who would like to participate in that conversation, whether we have something to contribute or not. What we can hear is what the folks who are making decisions about what goes on in the school have to say about school X. And there might be more synergy between the board. I don't want to cross over into board member directing what staff does. That's not our role. But I do think there might be for example, it's my understanding that typically principals are not involved in discussing what the student assignment plan is going to be for their school. And this form and process might be a way for them to be involved before they find out their PTA is being moved to another school. And so I'm looking at engagement and collaboration as opposed to only number crunching and moving parts of the ship. And I don't know how that fits into this process or whether it does.
It does.
Well, I mean, that could be part of policy, but it definitely is part of practice, right? I mean, what we're talking about already, right? And this is why we're having our discussion right now so that we can be more focused during the day, because it's very easy for us to go in 1,000 different directions. We don't want to do that. At the same time, what we're
We have a
talking
lot of practice.
You want to do it more, right?
at the same time,
We
we're
need to
talking.
start a
Stand in
new
the
practice
parking
and break
lot
habits.
next
It's not what I've been learning at my retreats.
We're talking about systems change, right?
Focus on automatic.
And as Dr. Trice often talks about, right, the technical versus adaptive. To too much of a degree, we've let student assignment be a technical thing. And what we're talking about, what you've just raised here, is bringing some of that adaptive work into our work. And that's what's going to happen when the systems change. Lindsay?
Well, I would say another thing that isn't, well, I didn't see it on here, but it could be, is changes we make to a calendar. So if we have a restart school and, we don't change the calendar until after the assignment plan, and sometimes after people have already put in for their transfer, and then their calendar changes or their bell schedule time. And so, finding a way, I
All
don't
of
know
that coordination.
how that.
I think some of that will come.
It's already been coordinated.
Yes.
So we've already talked with Restarts about if there is going to be a changing calendar, that'll be incorporated into the assignment plan. It'll have its own section, and then that'll give all of the public feedback time throughout
Right.
the several months that we go through so that they're prepared. That was one thing we could learn from last year.
I want to recognize Monica and Keith, and then have Glenn move on a little bit so we can at least.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to what you just said because I did not know that you all had done that. So maybe it's going to be helpful if it's not a part of a presentation so we can maximize our time on the first, that if you tell us things that you've already done that are new, for me would help me not bring them back up on the first, because that's something that we've talked about, but if you've automatically done it, I don't want us to spend our time talking about it because we agree with it. So that's not what I was going to say, but want to add to that. So thank you for lifting that up for us. So I want to go back to kind of Mr. Sutton and Mr. Fletcher's point. And we've always, I mean, as long as I've been on the board, we've talked about all of these options being a tool in the toolbox to create healthy schools. So assignment, magnet, transportation, like we've talked about all of these things. And you hit the nail on the head. It requires us to use the adaptive process, which means it's something, in my experience, and I love all of us dearly, but we've actually not done that around healthy schools. I would definitely say when Tom was chair, we had you start that by giving us that chart, but the hard work is really the boards. So you can spend time telling us what you've done to answer, as I say, stop the bleeding, because I feel like every month we got to stop the bleeding. But we haven't actually talked about what are we willing to do as board members who are elected to actually address the bigger picture. So for me, that really means we have to step into the plate and do something that we haven't done before, which isn't comfortable to any of us. I think I drove some of you crazy while I was chair. The chaos, there's a sweet spot in the chaos, and it's okay to not have the answer when you start the process. We are a board who wants to know the answer before we do the process, or we don't do the process because we don't know the answer. So we just give you this technical answer because we can figure that out. So I can't raise my hand for the whole board, but I guess for me, as all of us think about what we're going to do next, I have 4 years of my child in the school system. I feel like we cannot keep asking staff to piecemeal answers when we're actually asking to do something that's bigger than your office can do by itself.
Yeah, you know I'm.
So we say that out loud, but we still end up doing, hey, we're going to talk about this right here, we're going to talk about this right here. And I get it. I'm saying we should do something hard that is risky. I'm not going to deny that's what I'm actually saying in this conversation.
I agree.
But we can't, to Bill's point, we can't change a school and the principals not understand why we changed it because we're just like, hey, look at our strategic plan. We're working on equity and healthy schools. Well, if we didn't prepare them, even the best principal who I don't believe has any issue around race could be taken off guard if we turn their schools upside down. And their whole PTA is gone and we've given them a whole other demographic without even consulting and working with them to ensure that they understand the why and the supports that we're able to provide to them. So my example yesterday is we turned a school upside down, and yes, what the principal said might have offended people, but she got rid of a whole active PTA. One person that's left is my BAC chair from her PTA when we changed that school. Wow. We gave transportation that doesn't get kids to school on time. Like, that's a real thing, and all we can hear is the principal say, well, I mean, you just changed the racial demographics of my school. That's true, right? So, and I guess we're used to looking for the phrase of, like, what is the person saying to make me think that they might be racist, or they might be biased, or they only want a certain type of student. That's true, and people say the same thing when they are actually asking us for help. So that's a long way of saying it's risky.
It's going to be risky.
So some of y'all are running for new office. I think it's a great time because you're not coming back. So I think we should do it now.
Best time to do it.
Well, I mean,
I think it's a good time to do it.
Yeah.
that is why we're having this discussion today, to get us set for, I mean, you just pitched it exactly, right? Saturday the 1st is going to be a hard work day. Do not expect to just come and sort of talk about a few ideas and yay, right?
Yeah.
We've got hard work ahead of us. So go ahead, Glenn. Or did Keith, you want to say something quickly?
I'm getting back to your presentation.
Yeah.
So, So you back to your slide, Toyo. You want us to answer that question. So are you looking at us in the answer, and you expecting us to sort of pick one of these over the other? Are you expecting us to kind of rank them in priority? Are you expecting us to kind of give a weighted?
So I can't answer that because I think you guys need to determine what's going to be your driving factor. And then if it means just reprioritizing the 4 pillars, and then we work through that way, or if you've got something else,
We prioritize
we'll prioritize.
We never have, yeah.
Well, in defense of staff, I mean, we do prioritize them in a way, because in years, we've always prioritized them with operational efficiency, because we're opening up a new school in a crowded area. So that's how we've always done that. We've looked at student achievement as well, trying to have balanced, healthy, integrated schools. We also do try to balance in their proximity, because we all do hear, hey, I'm very proximate to this school, why are you making me go elsewhere? So there is a push and pull. We gave a presentation to BACs 2 years ago, I believe it was, where we talked about how we do prioritize some of those based on the situation of what's going on. So there is a prioritization, but I think if we can have one main focus where we can turn around and say, we did this because of this, and then we considered all of these other factors, it's easier for parents, I think, to understand as to the why we did what we did, rather than them being able to take the 4 pillars and say, well, you could have done it this way differently and it would have had a different outcome that's more favorable to what I want. And they're right. But when we look at the school system as a whole, it's hard. You know, we have 162,000 kids that we have to worry about, not just the 1 or 2 that are in one household. So I think that's where you can come up with a way to tell us this is how we want it done first, and then we can organize everything beyond that.
So as you all know, I'm really hesitant to do this because I hate it. Because I like the chaos of discussion, but it is almost 5 o'clock. Yep. And we've got the regular board meeting that starts at 5:30. So I think if you don't mind, let's let Glenn sort of do a little bit more stage setting, because we're going to have a whole day to work on this. But I would like Glenn to sort of do the stage setting. And
We're so excited.
this, for example, is saying, yeah, Glenn put a question down here, but it's saying we need to relook at the policy.
Okay, but you got
So,
okay, one quick. How do we currently, since it's on the slide, how do we currently measure success? Because it seems to me that we measure success based on parent satisfaction, and if parent noise is low,
I'm writing it down.
we feel like we've been successful.
I've been trained.
That could be one way of doing it. I mean,
No, I'm asking you, how do we do it now?
my personal, yeah, I mean, I don't think my personal response is appropriate, because, I mean, I don't make the final decision, you guys do. I mean, are you happy with the enrollment plans that we've put out? Do you feel like we've accomplished what we set out to accomplish? If the answer is no, then we need to make some changes.
all right. Do a little more for him.
All right, so another area of feedback, multi-track year-round schools. We've had this discussion about multi-track year-round schools. I provided you with data about the inequities between multi-track year-round schools and their traditional counterparts. You know, do we need to focus on student achievement or operational efficiency or accommodating parent choice when we look at trying to fill multi-track year-round schools and keep them healthy and robust? Do we have too many? Do we have too little? Those are questions that we probably need to look at and answer as a group. What purpose do they serve? I think is more importantly, you know, magnets serve a purpose, and I'll get into this in the next slide, but magnets serve a purpose, okay? We've got transportation incentives, but magnets serves a purpose for the district. What purpose does calendar application schools serve? And we provide transportation to calendar application schools now. Does it serve the purpose to the district in any way? Do we benefit by offering calendar application school transportation to families? I think that's another question that needs to be answered, because I know it's inefficient when you look at buses going into neighborhoods and going to multiple schools. But if it's serving a purpose where it's helping us achieve, whether it's student achievement, whether it's proximity, whether it's stability, we can hang our hat on that, that's fine. But if we can't measure that success, then why are we doing it? So I think that's what I'd like to hear from the board is, you know, what do we need to do in order to make sure that we're serving a purpose, and everything that we do and every option that we provide to families must have an overarching result that we can say is successful for the district as a whole.
All right, we'll keep them quick.
I just want to throw out, I really like the special attention given to multi-track year-round middle school.
Christian Heather.
Not to be rhetorical, but isn't, of all the purposes you mentioned, you didn't mention organizational efficiency, which I thought was the justification for even having this.
that was going to be my question, was like maybe a reminder of why we started multi-track year-rounds to begin with.
Is that?
I mean, we know
I'm not
why.
gonna answer that now, but that's where we started a couple months ago, right? Can we establish principles for why we do what? Once we have principles, then we can ask, is this decision aligned with the principle or is it not? So that's some of the work we have to do. The why.
All right, so just getting quickly on this slide for transportation incentives. So currently, transportation is provided to the base school, the calendar application school, and then eligible magnet schools based on your address. Magnet transportation is an incentive to help achieve the district's magnet goals. Okay, base school transportation is to help achieve the district's enrollment plan goals. We assign students to a particular base school for a reason. And so by providing calendar application school transportation, do we want to establish a purpose or have principles that are surrounding to either incentivize or de-incentivize parent choice to those particular schools?
Good question.
I'm just doing one day.
How long is your carpool line?
On one day, right? We're not going to solve all the world's problems or even all Lake County's problems in one day. But
So then, academic programming also has come up in discussions with board members. Magnet schools offer enhanced academic programming in an effort to provide healthy, balanced, integrated schools. Okay, if non-magnet schools are offering similar programs at their base schools, what incentive do families have to go to magnet schools to help us have balanced, healthy, integrated schools? I'll say what nobody else really talks about. We don't have affordable housing everywhere in the district. And so we can't have proximate attendance areas and have healthy, balanced schools. It's just not going to happen. We need community support on that, as Superintendent Moore had shared with staff recently. And so what can we do as staff and a board to try to have healthy, balanced, integrated schools with looking at the programming that's offered at different schools?
Let's see if Durham gets that money to create affordable housing as a school district.
Do they have a...
But on that same,
They've asked for permission.
That's what I mean.
in the same regard, though, there are families who live in areas where they might not be able to come to a magnet school. So that's the only pause I would give to that. Absolutely understand where this is coming from and why, but I just want to also have that be part of the conversation, is that if there are people who live in an area where they may not be magnet priority to attend a school, don't we want to have some sort of academic programming at that school that is still...
Excellent point.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? How do we make it the and instead of the or? I mean, that's really what we have to do, right? Because we have to have strong base schools, too. We've got to make it the and.
We had a former staff member, leader in the district, who used to talk about cupcakes. And the idea was everyone gets a cupcake.
It's really good
Everyone
cupcake.
should have some. And it needs to be a really good cupcake that everybody really likes. And then you may have some some cupcakes with frosting on them. And then you may have some cupcakes with sprinkles and frosting on them. And the idea was really sort of, saying with our schools that if we know what the really good cupcake is, then we have a standard and a baseline and expectation for all of our schools. But there will be some schools that may have frosting or sprinkles because those are strategic and targeted to needs that the district may have for other priorities. And so, but the issue I think has been in the last 10, 15 years is nobody's defining the cupcake. So everybody's defining it on their own.
Yeah.
And I think that's the work perhaps that lays before us.
And that's how we get to the conversation we had yesterday about what schools have decided to do.
Yes.
Was that quick comments? Chris?
I was just asking background questions for background information that we didn't need to
Yep,
cover.
we're good. No, we're good. I'm just trying to make sure I recognize, I'm trying to both recognize comments
Right.
and keep this focused. Go ahead, Glenn.
So this concludes our presentation.
Oh, there you go.
Good job.
Bill?
Okay, I am, what is the source of our data and analysis? And is the county working with us to review and agree that the student enrollment growth projections are what we all should rely upon? Are we, have we made any changes in our data source and modeling since last year?
We do have revised projections, yes.
And are they?
And we are doing them
Okay.
jointly.
All right.
As we have been.
Okay. Having spent a great deal of time looking at both the base enrollment and the population enrollment reports for our schools, with several board members who've never seen those, it would be helpful to have nicely formatted current reports of those two reports for each board member to understand if there are 800 kids in my base and only 400 attend in my school, where do the other 400 go? And that's a very helpful report.
Yeah.
We can get that.
We even talked about, when Glenn and I met, if we could map our school demographics on top of the census tract demographics of the area. Yep. That will be very important, both for your point and for Mr. Sutton's point, right? If we're going to truly look at segregation issues, we need to know, do our schools look like the area? Is the area segregated, or is our school segregated?
Are we looking at race, or are we looking at
economics?
SES?
But we can do both.
Okay. Another question I would like to ask of staff, and there have been some small discussions about just what is the district required to do in terms of bus transportation. And I'd really like to see if there's a definition that's different than the practice that we have, or if our practice is aligned with what the law requires. Because that may change resource or may not. And there was something that was said, which is I think important, and it's a difficult conversation to ask, is what is the why? Why are we doing this? And that becomes the driver around all the other conversations. So that's for the board to do. And it's not school by school. It is globally, this is our objective. This is why we're setting in place this range of strategies and policies. So those are my thoughts having looked at this. Thank you, Glenn, for putting this together. The superintendent wasn't in the room when I mentioned the idea of the board working with the staff on particular schools, but I'll share that with her later.
Ms. Mahaffey and Ms. Scott?
I appreciate the fact that we're looking at magnet transportation. I know a lot of frustration goes around, especially our express busing, whether it's options of after-school care, how do I get my child there? I'd love to go to this school, but the express stop that you've given me is 3/4 of the way there. And I think the piece that I've already stated but want to reiterate is there has to be communication and education for the whole district, because we have to share with our community our why. And I know we're working to do that, but there are pieces of, I had students at a high school say, well, how come we have kids that don't live nearby that come to our school, and walk them through the history of the school system, that video, that video that we put out. And then they said, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. But I think as we grow and there's more people from, like me who grew up in small districts, to share the why of our district needs to be a constant piece. The why of the district, the why of the magnets, what is the purpose of the magnets? Why were they put there? And as people move in, we have to keep going. I mean, is it 60-something people a day still that may not understand that why?
Scott?
And I'm not sure if this is the most appropriate place for this question, but when considering student assignment, are we tracking students who have been displaced due to gentrification within neighborhoods? And what kind of impact does that have on the schools in those neighborhoods where the neighborhood looks very different? Even schools where magnet schools are in place now, and the neighborhood looks very different now. Do we ask that hard question of what is the purpose of a magnet school? Are we still meeting those needs? And then knowing where those students go, does that also put a potential for a magnet school elsewhere to just make sure that we're serving, meeting the needs of the program and fulfilling those, but especially the tracking part of students who've been displaced.
So we keep referring to this why, and we're saying like, well, what is the purpose of the magnet program and that sort of thing. Well, we know what the purpose of the magnet program is. And that's
right.
Really clearly stated. So I guess my question is, do we not know? I mean, I think we know what the why is. If we don't know what the why is, then we probably need to take these last few minutes to figure out what that why is, so that when we get here Saturday on June 1st, we're not spending half the day talking about what is the why. And it seems like the why to me would be, so that what are our goals? What do we want to accomplish with this new plan? And what are the board's goals? And what are the superintendent's and staff's goals? And are those goals aligned? So that we're coming in on Saturday with then what the work is to get to those goals. So
That's not going to be, we think it's very clear, but I think we're going to.
that's what I'm not suggesting it is or isn't.
I thought it was really clear when I got back on the board.
I think
so
we've got
now-
some global why, but there's all kinds of levels of why. But your point is very well taken, right? I mean, are we willing to say, here is the why, and we're going to work to meet that why? Or are we going to talk around the why?
In the words of Roxy Castro, she
Do
came
we know
back.
what the why is? Do we not?
Thank
I'm
you.
looking around the room like, do we know what the why is? Do we not know what the
Well,
why
I think
is?
I think people, and I'm speaking for myself, I feel like we've talked about it enough that I understand the why of magnet schools. When I was referring to it, I think it's people in the community and making sure we communicate the why out and the purpose. Because in my district, I don't have magnet schools. So I hear the question of, well, why do I have to go to Raleigh to access X, Y, and Z? And so then I have to educate on the magnet schools and why we have the magnets. So,
Right, but
so
I'm
that's,
saying, if the community doesn't know what the why is,
That's on us.
it's probably because we sit
Yeah.
around this table and dance around what the why is.
Absolutely, which is what Jim does.
Well, there was two reasons for magnet schools, not just one.
So we can like or not like Thomas Jefferson.
Or filling empty seats.
Thomas Jefferson in 1782 said, "By selecting youths of genius from among the classes of the poor, we hope to avail the state with those talents which nature has sown liberally among the poor as well as the rich, but which perish without use if not sought for and cultivated." The why is that we need to be seeking for and cultivating the opportunities for every child. That's the basis of public education. That's the why of what we're about, and it doggone needs to be every child. That why hasn't changed. What we do about it has often been the problem,
And how we accomplish it.
and how we accomplish it.
Okay. That was a little deep.
Well,
That wasn't the basic.
We
We really need
obviously,
to say we really need to do what Keith is saying, Tamara.
well, we need to not have segregated schools.
Right.
And we need to create opportunity for every child.
And that's what we have to start saying out loud and be
We
clear
do
about.
need to say we don't want segregated schools and we don't want unutilized schools.
Absolutely. Mr. Fletcher.
Just one more data question. There have been different levels of suggestion from the federal government that we can or cannot use free and reduced lunch price information for geographic areas, as we have in the past. More recently, we've not been able to do that, I think. And so would really like to get from council or staff or both what is permitted today in terms of the use of not individual data but aggregate data to inform the board about different strategies and their impact. And if we can't use FRLP data, then what is a legitimate substitute if it's census block, census tract, something else, because we will be hamstrung guessing at what that data is and not able to make clear decisions. So I really think it's a data point that's got to be clarified in how we move forward as a board and what we rely upon.
And that's another one where we've got to recognize it needs to be done, and so we need to figure out how.
Exactly.
Rather than saying we can't. Ms. Cushman?
I was going to say, just practically, we have our magnet principles. Maybe we need to review those. But also, I think Glenn raised the issue, do we need multi-track year-round school principles that are as clear as what our magnet principles say? I mean, those are sort of federally, come from the federal level, the magnet priorities, but or principles, but do we need that for multi-track? So that we are clear about why we have more multi-track schools in fast-growing areas where we don't have them in central parts. I mean, why do we have multi-track schools where we have them? Why do we have magnet schools where we have them? I think there is.
Well said.
There are things we have said, and the staff should bring that to us so that we buy back into that that's the reason we do what we do.
I think that's a heavy lift of our work as a board, is to set those governing principles. Well, magnets already set, partly by the
And we review
national.
those every 3 years when we
Right.
do our magnet plan.
And multi-track we need, but as somebody said, I think it's got to be all schools, right? Because if we're going to deal with the race issues, as Keith notes, if we're going to deal with segregation,
Need to address.
we need principles for all schools, not just our
Right.
year-rounds and magnets. And so I think this is a lot of the governing work that is on our plate.
So we have a third of our why clearly stated. We need to get to
Right.
the other two-thirds.
Okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to mention.
I feel better already.
You've heard me talk about this organization before, but there is a national coalition on school diversity that's out of the U.S. Department of Education that we actually just discussed this week in SLT about bringing them on to help us with some of this work.
That's good.
Because we're not doing it as a board.
And I think it's time. I've actually said this before. We are large enough, complex enough, and we have enough of a history that I think that we need to bring in some help with regards to what this looks like, how it can be accomplished.
Did you hear me say that last night?
And I think they would love to be invited by us to be a part of our work moving forward.
I think that's great. Large
I would just
enough,
say, I
complex
think,
enough, and
to me, those are the kinds of things that need to be part of the conversation on Saturday. You know, what are the strategies, what are the supports, what are the tools that are available to us, and make some decisions about how we use and implement and resource some of those. I don't know that Committee, you said it earlier, language is important. And I don't know that it's talking about principles. I mean, we've had principles in our pillars, and they don't really move us to doing anything. It's sort of like what the superintendent said yesterday, what gets done is what gets monitored. I already said
It's
that.
monitored.
It's monitored, gets done. Do we use principles? And do we think that's going to govern us, or do we go back to using some sort of targets that trigger us into action and move us into a particular direction? If any school falls below this point, that point, here or there are specific actions. The principles haven't really moved us
the target.
to a target or to an action. So if it's, so make a decision, is it primitive lunch or some combination of what do we have? And then once we made a decision, how we then again operationalize that into some sort of measurable metric, target, quantifiable results so that we see, is a school performing, not performing? Are they failing this area, not this area? And then there are prescribed actions that we're doing. Those, to me, it seems like are the kinds of decisions we ought to be looking at and considering on Saturday than having sort of this oral conversation about
It's specific.
Well, I think we need to be careful about what we mean by principles, because are they just feel-good ideas, or are they the reference points against which we can make some measurements? I would argue that our principles need to be more reference points against which we can make measurements so that we can make decisions.
Yes. So my point last night when I said this was, and no disrespect to any of us, including our staff, because I think everybody's brilliant, we haven't figured this out. So for me, I feel like if we make these decisions, they're going to be technical solutions. We're all going to revert to what we know. We're not going to come up with the real change that we're asking to see. I guess I'm saying, and Ms. Cash has been saying, so she can say if she still agrees, we have to know where each of us sits and how far we're willing to go. Because nobody can come in here and give us a great plan if we haven't really decided what we really have the courage to do. That's just the bottom line. So we can set targets, but I'm telling you, they're going to be the targets we already set. We're going to be like, oh, we want this school to have this FNR. We are still going to be having this conversation. Not because we're not smart, but it's because it's muscle memory. We know the tools that are out there to use, and I think there are other tools that we don't have access to.
We have a blessing in that we are a unified school district.
Agreed. And we
Several
want
of
to
us
keep it that way.
went to Rochester, New York last year. There are 19 school districts in one county.
28 in the one I grew up in.
Okay. The opportunity to deal with this issue when there are 19 different governing bodies is astronomically more difficult than it is here. And I will just add one more thing, and Harvey Schmidt gets credit for this. In terms of communication, we are always preaching to a parade.
Yes, agreed.
The people we need to influence are not standing still. We can never,
Exactly.
we can never,
absolutely true.
we can never
They'll be
give
gone
up
next year when we tell them the
communicating
story this
the
year.
purpose of the public schools.
And that's why talking about
Wildwood
the why
County
is
is the way it
important.
is.
The why is, we have to be able to say it quickly.
So again, with time, I think the discussion today has been exactly what needed to happen to get us thinking about it. And I don't think any of us can disagree that we've got at least a full day of work. I mean, we've got a lifetime's work, but we will clearly be able to fill up a day on this. And we've got this. We're not going to solve everything in one day. But we do want to focus, and we want to make some real measurable progress on Saturday. So, and Glenn, you can refine this, but you've heard a start of some questions. We've had a lot of discussion. We've thrown a lot of stuff. I've tried to take some notes, as I know Glenn has as well. But if there are some specific questions, if there's specific pieces of data that you think about in the next couple of days that ought to be part of this work, please send them at least to Glenn, Kathy, and myself. And it's going to take a little bit of work to try to formulate, okay, so what do we do on Saturday, right? Because the lift is bigger than one day's lift. We've got to find that right balance between breadth and depth. We want to walk away with Saturday with some actionable things, with some decisions made, but also with some of the bigger work that we need to do. So think about it over the next few days. Any ideas, suggestions, please forward them at least to the three of us. You're welcome to copy it to the board. We won't have board-to-board discussion on it, but that way we can plan, because we want, if we plan in the next 2-ish weeks, we'll be ready for June 1st. Okay? Thank you. Thank you for a very good discussion today, and I look forward to a really hard but rewarding June 1st. Thank you. We'll adjourn the work session.
I was worried about it.
I know.
I don't want to do it.
Yeah, all day.